So there is a lot of value in generics, but we would advise clients to choose a distinctive mark because you want to be found on the internet and you want to reduce your exposure to infringement.
Hello and welcome to Brand Tuned, a podcast on brand management that covers trademarks and IP as they're intrinsic to brand equity. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, author of Brand Tuned. Writing this led to Byron Sharp's evidence-based research stressing distinctiveness over differentiation, which I largely agree with, though not totally. Hence our tagline, Sharp Branding. My guest today is Daniel Greenberg, an intellectual property lawyer who is specialized in trademarks, copyright, domain names, and online brand enforcement. He is the founder of LexSynergy, a global domain management company. Welcome to the Brand Tune podcast, Daniel.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you for having me.
Great. Tell us a bit more about your business. What's the story behind it?
Well, when I was in private practice, I realized that there was a demand for domain name related services and online brand protection. And there was a bit of a gap between what lawyers provide and what domain name registrars provide. So there was this service that could be offered to lawyers themselves as well as brand owners so that they could take adequate steps to protect themselves online, manage their domain name centrally. So identifying that niche, that was really the start of LexSynergy.
And what was it like at the beginning? What were the challenges?
Well, there were a few challenges. The biggest challenge was the technical aspect. That was getting the right technical people on board, the developers to get the systems going. Also educating clients about the need for it, because we established it about 13 years ago. That was just at the time where domain names are starting to become more relevant and important. So it was really education, kind of creating that understanding that there is a need for these types of services.
So what type of clients do you typically serve?
So it's quite a wide range. It can range from law firms to large corporates to the man in the street. So someone that has 2 or 3 domain names to a client that has 10,000 domains. Obviously, it's our services are more aligned to clients that have larger portfolios and have more issues online because our systems allow them to manage all these issues, resolve them, rather than someone having one domain name where maybe a retail option is more viable for them.
Right. So in what contexts do you get involved? How do you help your clients? Give me some more information.
So what we do is when we engage with the client initially, we normally conduct a domain name audit. And what that is basically is the health check of their brand online. So we take their trademark portfolio and we see how they've protected themselves within the domain name space. And this audit picks up gaps in their portfolio. Maybe they're missing registration. So if you're a UK company, you've got your .uk. Did you secure your .uk? Then you could look at, .london and things like that. So we would identify those gaps. We'd also identify infringements. So where someone is using your brand to as a form of squatting. So registering something that's confusingly similar or identical. It picks up that so that they can decide whether they want to take action to resolve it or recover the domain name, and then also look at how people are using their brand on websites connected to the domain. And once they have this domain name and it's their benchmark, they then know what they need to do. Either it's very serious and they need to implement a watch service, so that would notify them every month or when someone registers a domain name that is similar to their brand or matching it. And or they would realize that maybe there isn't any issue and they can simply do an audit once every few years. And then when there are issues there, we would sit down with them and advise them on how to resolve it. And sometimes it's just a practical solution to get something addressed, or it would require a domain name complaint to be drafted or a website takedown. And if it requires a solicitor's skill set, then we would refer it to a lawyer where our client would deal with that. But it's essentially trying to get them to a stage where they know that they can control all their domain names centrally. So the audit does pick up domain names that they may own that are also scattered with different providers. Then we would advise them to rather centralize, because with the GDPR, a lot of information on domain names is redacted. So sometimes you may own the domain name, but you won't know it from the actual record that's online. And as a result, some companies end up sending cease and desists letter or emails to a domain name owner that they think is a squatter, but in fact, it is probably a third-party provider or it could be their own company. It could be an employee at their company.
So there's a lot there. One point is whether, if you've got a really unique name that you've trademarked, presumably you don't have to go around registering all these different domain suffixes, like you were saying, .London and so on. So what's your view on that?
Well, I think the domain name industry, there's a conflict with trademarks, and the trademarks, as you know, the more distinctive the mark, the better. In the domain name world, the more generic the domain name is, the more valuable it is. So for instance, business.com would be worth a lot more than, say, lexinergy.com, being an invented word. So there is a lot of value in generics, but we would advise clients to choose a distinctive mark, because you want to be found on the internet and you want to reduce your exposure to infringement. So you don't have to go crazy with registrations, but I do think there are certain key ones that you need to go for, because it's good to do it at the early stages, because as your business builds up, to try and recover all those domain names could be quite difficult. What we advocate is to rather register identical matching ones and don't go, crazy with variation. So if it's Lexinergy, you wouldn't go and register lexinergydomains.com or lexinergybrandprotection.com, just Lexinergy, and you'd focus on the popular generics as well as country codes where you trade or intend to trade, and then maybe high risk countries. That's where you'd register, just to mitigate the cost of potential recoveries.
Right. Well, I'm interested to hear that you think there's a value in these generic names, because you don't get any benefit nowadays from using keyword-rich names in terms of search engines. So why are they still valuable?
I think it's got to do with clients being able to remember. There is some historical SEO aspects to it. I know Google's always changing their algorithms. But for instance, if you were behind a bus and you see Lexinergy at the back of a bus, after a while you'll go, well, what was it? Was it Lexus Synergy? Was it Lexinergies? Or you may not even remember the name, but if it was domaindispute.co, which incidentally we own, that's more rememberable. So someone would say, okay, well, let me use that domain, because from a marketing perspective, so that we can direct people that see our name wherever we publish it, and direct them to our site where they would see Lexinergy as the brand.
I see. Okay, so you would redirect it, like books.com redirects to Barnes and Noble, for example.
Exactly. The same as booking.com. As we know, obviously there was that recent case that came out with that particular mark, but booking.com is brilliant, because you say, I'm going to make a booking. And if you went to, say, booking.com, but it accidentally went to Expedia, you're still getting that traffic. And I think that's where you need to marry your trademark with a generic. And if you do it quite well, it can be an effective marketing tool.
So do you still think that people should try and own the .com to their brand name?
Yes, I do. There are a lot of new GTLBs that have come out. There are over 1,000 now, but .com is still king. A lot of people try and detract from that, but it still is. I would say if you can't get the .com and you're a startup, rather think of another name. That's
really,
I think it is. Yes, because .com is an international extension. Many people think it's assigned to the US. It just happens that a US registry operates the TLD, but its com is international. If I use .uk or co.uk, we are fluent and we know what .uk means. But if you go to the US, they won't be too fluent. They'll go UK, okay, we can assume it's the United Kingdom, but you can go to other countries like Australia, where it's com.au. AU is also the abbreviation for Austria, but they use AT. So the country codes are good locally, but internationally, com still reigns. And I would say keep the com and also keep your local one. And I think they can be used in conjunction with each other. And the new GTLDs do have a space, and that is where you really want to name, and you just can't get it within a .com. So if a lot of people are going for .io now, we have a client that is using .africa as their main extension, just because they focus on the African market. But those are the exceptions, I think. But generally, I would still align with the .com.
Well, we'll have to disagree on that, because I think if you've got a really good name, then you might get the .com down the line, but I wouldn't sacrifice a good name. You can use .global or something like that. Yes. Initially.
You could, and I think it does come down to how much money you put behind your brand and how much you can market, because people would assume that if you have the local one, you've got the .com as well. And as your brand builds, by the time you've gained that reputation, it could be more expensive for you to acquire that domain name at a later date, or someone could try and piggyback off you, even though that their registration predates your mark. So it really depends what industry you're in. If you're like a Purple Bricks, then I would say, okay, you can go for the .uk because you're just serving the UK market and com isn't that important. But if you go, if you extend beyond your borders, then I think you may need that.
Yeah, I had a client recently who did all her checks and chose the name, and we filed the trademark application. And then she went to buy the .com, which was available, and lo and behold, it had gone. There's this anecdotal evidence that people actually register the domain. So, in that case, we'd already filed the trademark application, made the decision, and the .com was gone. So
it's what I would suggest generally is to try and secure the domain name before filing the trademark, just because of the cost. The cost is nominal, and what sometimes some of these squatters do is it happened to us is they monitor the trademark database, and the minute the mark is published, it's normally about maybe 3 to 4 days after filing. They then register the domain name and they wait because they know the person will eventually reach out to them. So our trademark is our domain is domains. So we thought we're not going to register the .uk or co.uk because when you read it as one word, it reads as our domain is domains. So we thought that doesn't really make sense. So let's not register it. And then when our mark was filed, a few days later, we got an email saying, do you want to buy this domain name from us? We registered it a few days ago. And then I wrote back saying, well, our filing predates yours by a couple of days. You're clearly monitoring it. And they did actually hand it over, but they do monitor. So, with these online databases, it can work against the trademark owner. So they should secure it as soon as possible. And one other thing is they should be very wary of where they're searching for domains, because there are a lot of services out there that do track and realize someone's had multiple searches against that name, and then they can secure that.
Yeah, exactly. I often advise people to search in the browser. In this case, I thought that the .com had already been registered, so.
Yes.
But, hopefully down the line they can get it. I've known plenty of people who, like we got asrights.com 10 years after we began using it. And it wasn't very expensive, maybe 1,000 or so, not huge.
But that's reasonable under the circumstances. Yes, definitely. How
did you go about creating your own brand?
So it actually touches on what we've just spoke about. So when I started Lex Synergy, I wanted the .com. I wanted to make sure that I could get, this was obviously about 14 years ago, I wanted to make sure that I could get the domain name in the countries that were targets for us, being the UK, US, and South Africa. and I was coming up with a lot of different names, and it was quite difficult to find the right combination. But then I came up with Lex for law, and the Synergy, which is taking the law and IT and the internet and combining it together to give that overall protection. And that's where we came up with the name Lex Synergy. And what I did do is I did look at the market, saw what our competitors are using. And the irony is a lot of our competitors in the corporate namespace use very generic names themselves. So we thought we have to practice what we preach, get something that's distinctive. So when we advise clients on it, they can see that, we kind of holding true to our philosophy in that when you start a business, you should really distinguish yourself from potential competitors, and coming up with a unique name is the key, I think. So that was the story surrounding the name.
And what about the actual visual identity? When did you deal with that?
So that was at the stage where we went through a logo company, I can't recall the name, where you'd pay a couple of pounds and they would design the logo for you. And I got the logo back. I thought it was a brilliant design. It was like orange and blue and very wavy. And I was happy to go ahead with it. And then I met a brand consultant. They looked at that and said, you shouldn't put that on any website. So they then readjusted it, realigned it, and it's gone through an evolution of changing the logo, bringing it in line with more of a corporate feel, corporate colors. So there has been this evolution. I do think that there are a lot of good services out there to get the ball rolling at relatively low cost, but I think it's very important to get the branding right from the onset, and then you can always evolve with it as your business expands or grows.
Right. So you started out with orange and then changed to blue, did you?
Yes, that's right. It was a baby blue with orange. I saw they actually delivered it on a CD, which I don't think people do anymore these days. But when you start off a business, you do have a limited budget and you have to prioritize. So what we tried to do is see what we could use online, and at least it gave us a starting point from which to kind of evolve the brand. And I thought it was a good starting point.
You're seeing domain names like pets.com and so on are increasing in price still, are they?
Yes, they are. I think we do a lot of anonymous approaches or acquisitions of domain names. So where a client would want to acquire a domain, and the minute you hit the generic space, it is very costly. And the shorter the domain name, the more valuable. So pets, you're looking at 4 characters. So it would be quite expensive. The longer the word, the cheaper it is. So I'm still seeing some big numbers being thrown around for the shorter generic names.
I think maybe the mistake people make is that because these domain names are desirable, they then think that they should call their own business by such names. So instead of having a brand name,
Yes.
certainly in the early days of the internet, these sort of businesses like pets.com were raising huge amounts of funds, and yet none of them have survived because they didn't have a brand name. They just used these generic names for their own brand name.
I agree with you. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but what I tend to tell people is that they should come up with a distinctive name for the actual brand, and then their payoff line could be the descriptive element in the beginning, because they want to describe what their business does, but don't describe it in the actual name itself, because then other people could infringe upon you relatively easily, and you may not even be able to secure your trademark. So if you called yourself, like, I don't know, pet services, people could use that. And I think that's a problem with some businesses. They get so excited and they say, well, that's what it is. But, the domain name can carry you so far, but eventually people start stepping on your toes. A good example is Etsy, which I don't know if you're familiar with the Etsy website. That has a distinctive name, so that is quite good. I think it's derived from some Italian word, but if they called it crafts.com or arts and crafts, I would be, if I set up a similar business, I could call it that myself and just call it artsandcrafts.co.uk instead of com. And there's not much I could do about it, but I can't use Etsy. So I think that's the key point there.
Exactly. It preserves your revenues and ensures that all the value that comes to your brand is unique to you rather than being shared with competitors. So,
that's exactly it. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so that's interesting then, that they are still valuable, these keyword-rich names. I wanted to really understand that. So just to finish then, which brand do you particularly admire and why? Is there one that you think has done a really good job of branding themselves?
Generally, whenever I'm asked this, it's a tough question, but I do, Virgin does stand out for me. Just because the brand can be used across multiple different goods and services, and people recognize it, they understand it, and it's so distinctive that you can call it Virgin Mobile, Virgin Credit Card, Virgin Atlantic, and that main identifier stays consistent. It's I use the example Carphone Warehouse. If they wanted to start an airline, I wouldn't fly Carphone Warehouse Airlines.
No.
It's just, you can't do much with it. And even that, what's a car phone? I think that was in the 80s when people had a big device in the middle of their car. So I think Virgin does stand out for me as one that can be applied across multiple sectors without really changing much. I don't think even Coca-Cola can do that. Coca-Cola is limited to the soft drink industry, but Virgin can really do anything. And I think that's how their business has kind of grown and expanded, is they can attach that Virgin to anything, and it should carry that notoriety with it.
Yeah, that's a good choice, because I'm writing a new book, and in doing a lot of the research, I've actually realized that it's quite a mistake to choose more than one brand name, because unless you've got the resources to do 10 times the marketing, then you shouldn't have 10 names. You should just conserve all your marketing for one brand name. So Virgin is brilliant in that way, because you can expand into other areas but still use the same name.
Yes, and I do think with a big marketing budget, you could really sell any name. But what you want to do is try to have that flexibility and have a robust mark that you could apply to many different sectors these days. And with the world going online, you want to make sure that you can use it in the right way. And I think Virgin does do that.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Daniel, for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the Brand Tuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtune.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you, and bye for now.